social worker with Hope for HIE. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we are doing another installment of our Peer Perspectives panel. Today, we're going to be talking about HIE and kidney impacts. I have two wonderful co-facilitators today. I have Margie and Julie. They're going to share a little bit about their journey, and then we're going to get to some more information just to share with everyone in our Hope for HIE community. As we always, remind everybody, we have tons of resources in the Hope for HIE community. So please go to hie.support to learn more about resources that are available. And as always, this is not medical advice. Please follow up with your providers. This is just a panel of families sharing a little bit about their journey. So Margie and Julie, if you'd like to give a brief introduction, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, now I'm off mute. My name is Margie, and I live in Virginia, and I have 3 children. 2 of them are 11-year-old twins, one of whom has HIE, and the other is almost 7. And we've been in this world for 11 years now.
Hello, I am Julie, and I'm married and I live in Texas, in Houston, and we have 6 kids all together. Colton is our youngest; he's 13, and he was born with HIE, and so we've been around for 13 years. And Margie and I are good friends, and we found each other on Hope for HIE a long time ago.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for introducing yourselves and sharing a little bit about your journey. And I'm excited to hear everything else you have to share with our community. So first, we want to talk a little bit about discussing kind of the NICU experience and the NICU stay that you both had, a little bit about what your experience looked like, a little bit about peritoneal dialysis, and then just some of the emotions and the different things that can come up during that process. So if you guys don't mind just sharing a little bit about that, that would be great.
Sure, I'll go first. So I think a lot of us here in the HIE community started off with birth trauma. Not everybody, but a lot of us. And that was how we ended up in this situation. We had a perfectly normal, identical twin pregnancy, which is to say that it was high risk, but there weren't any, red flags that anything specific was going on. And my water broke. There was meconium. I went into labor about a month early. And when the girls were born, the oldest, who is experienced, well, the first, she wasn't breathing. She was blue. Her APGAR was a 1. And they ended up sending her, they transferred her to a level 4 NICU, and they told us she needs cooling. And they told us at the time, they were like, she's going to be fine. There are just some things that we can't do for her here. It was a level 3 NICU. And I remember they handed us this little red folder full of paperwork to sign to give permission for them to do this cooling protocol. And, they just reassured us over and over, everything's going to be fine. This is not a big deal. Like, they had taken her away. And so, there was just so much like unknown and fear. Like, obviously, when your baby is not crying, that something is terribly wrong. And then they came and took the second one away from us because they said her sister is so sick. Like, we don't know what's wrong with her. We're afraid it might be also wrong with this one. And then I developed HELLP syndrome and hemorrhaged. And so like, there were just days and days of like, is, this child going to live? Is this mom going to live? And, then we were in the NICU for 71 days. And so I know that a lot of people, land here, basically like the rug is yanked out from underneath you and you land in this, this situation that you find yourself in the NICU and everything. And, we have a dog, Veggie. So in the NICU experience is unlike anything I had ever seen before. And I'll hand this over to Julie, after, but we had experienced some medical things in our family, like with my grandfather. He had been ill, but he was very old. He'd had lung cancer. So we had seen hospitals, we had seen medical treatments, but the NICU was an entirely different situation. And the first time that I saw Katie, our oldest, our first, I can't ever let her watch this because I told them that neither one of them are older, but the first one out, she was swollen beyond recognition, like because she wasn't, passing any urine or anything like this. And she looked nothing like her identical twin sister who was in the other hospital. And, it's just so jarring. It's like a walking nightmare that you cannot wake up from. Your baby has all these like tubes and monitors and we couldn't hold her. We could hardly touch her. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody. So just so much trauma involved in the whole entire thing. And I know Julie had some similar experiences.
Yes, definitely. My experience was that I had a normal pregnancy, completely normal. Everything was actually very easy and smooth. So it was an emergency C-section, and Colton was born not breathing, no heartbeat, and kind of a obviously very scary situation. But they had to resuscitate him, and when you before you're in this situation, you never even think it would ever happen to you. Like, I've never known anyone, or and so I thought, well, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I thought I didn't even know this world existed, to be honest with you. He went to Texas Children the next day.
Okay.
And it was pretty grim, and he was definitely swollen. And so anyways, we were there for 62 days, and it, like Margie said, it was definitely like we were on a different planet walking in those doors, especially because mine and probably Margie's too, our babies were one of the bigger babies in the NICU, because mostly they're preemie, and Colton was 7 pounds 11 ounces or something, and swollen, so he looked like a giant baby.
So one of the things we were going to talk about next is just a little bit about the transition from the NICU to home. So, Margie, if you just want to kind of start with that, I know the first thing that we were going to talk about a little bit about is feeding. So if you want to share just a little bit about the feeding and kind of how you navigated that with maybe some of the resources like feeding therapy, different things, lactation, and then we can go over a few other things you navigated at home.
Sure. So, feeding is a very common issue for babies that have kidney impacts. One of the reasons is because they don't feel good, so they don't generally have much of an appetite. But another is that they have to take a bunch of medications. And I know that when Katie was in the NICU, they were trying to teach her to take a bottle because she had also missed like the first 30 days of feeding. So she missed those natural like instincts and feeding cues and things. And so they have to start doing feeding therapy. But then they would give her bottles of expressed breast milk full of medication. So like one of them was salt water, and she didn't want to drink that. And I don't blame her one bit. Between that and, everything, the taste and everything else that had happened to her, she developed a severe feeding aversion. And so they ended up giving us the option of essentially, sending her to like a long-term rehab facility for, children and infants with significant medical needs, where they could handle the feeding, or we could get her a G-tube and take her home and do tube feeds. And we opted for the G-tube. And, we were really afraid of it at first. And, we had some people make some negative comments about the problems that it was going to cause her, and it would slow her down and things. And I want to say unequivocally and officially, the G-tube was hands down the best thing we ever did for that child. And she got to where she was able to, she just started breastfeeding And she was like, forget this. Like, once we got her home, she refused a bottle, and we were able to give her all of her medication and overnight feeds because she wasn't strong enough to take all of her calories during the day. And so all she had to worry about was nursing. And for us, that was incredibly therapeutic because she was able to nurse with her sister. She discovered her sister like at the breast, and they were able to play together. And it was like one day she just woke up, and this was our personal experience. So I would just want to offer comfort maybe to anybody whose baby's doctor has suggested a G tube, that for us, besides it being different and scary, it was an absolute lifesaver, and it made things so much easier for us, really. Like, it sounds crazy, but it alleviated so much of the pressure off of me to make sure that she did these things. You can only force a baby to do so many things. And she's quite stubborn, and which is why she's still here. But the G tube was absolutely wonderful for us. And then, Julie, do you want to talk about a G tube before we talk about actual like feeding, transition to older feeding?
Sure. Colton's experience was his brain damage was so severe that a lot of his inborn reflexes just were not there. He did not have the suck swallow. He did not have the startle reflex or any of them, really. And so they just thought for sure he would never, ever, ever be able to eat by mouth, feed by mouth, or anything. And so at about 5 weeks, I think it was about 5 weeks when he was in the NICU, I wasn't given a choice. It was like, this is the way he's going to, be able to feed. And so they gave him a G tube. And I'll never forget when we had the meeting with the doctors and they were telling us about, I'd never even seen a G tube in person up close. I had no idea how it worked or what the mechanics were of it. And I remember telling my husband and family, like, but I'm not a nurse. Like, how am I going to feed this child with this thing in his stomach? I'm not a nurse. How do I do this? And so I will encourage people that, and I can do it in my sleep now. It's something that definitely saved his life for sure, because I think about 7 years, he only nutritionally was able to feed through the G tube with formula and things. But we were also he's been in feeding therapy since the NICU as well. And so he actually has learned how to eat by mouth, which is a miracle in itself. But he does still have the G tube because with kidney transplant, which we'll get to, I'm sure, he has to have lots of medications, and he definitely would not be able to do that by mouth if he didn't have his G tube. But that's our experience. And coming home, it was a fight every single day. We had vomiting and all kinds of feeding issues, but it does get better, and either it gets better or you learn how to adjust and what your new normal is, because our normal is not like anybody else's normal. But anyway, so that's where we are with the feeding and the G tube.
To piggyback off of that, we used the G tube until, well, let's see. So we started feeding therapy, like intense feeding therapy, to get her to eat solids around a year old, because the pediatrician was finally like, I was like, she's like, she won't swallow anything. Like, she would put some foods in her mouth, but she would just like it's not happening. And so we started doing feeding therapy, and I mean, it took a solid year with like, we were fortunate in a lot of ways that we lived in Northern Virginia, so we had access to a lot of things that we wouldn't have had in many other places that I've lived. So we took her to Kennedy Krieger, and they did like a multidisciplinary approach, and we were able to cater it. Like, it was fantastic. So between that and like in-house oh God, what is it? Early intervention speech therapy. Like, they all worked on feeding to where she got to where she could eat orally. And she would take her meds. Well, she did her meds in the G tube for a long time after that. But I mean, she was 3 years old when we got it taken out, and she could put it in and take it out. Like she could just pop it in, twist it, and she's like, "Give me my meds," and then she'd, give it back. And so, I mean, it really is. It's easy once you get used to it. But feeding, I mean, I feel like we have to touch on the difficulty of feeding issues. Because with kidney disease, with advanced kidney disease, you have all sorts of dietary restrictions, and you have children who don't want to eat anyway. So like we finally got her to where she would eat, but then we had to be incredibly careful about what she did eat. You have to keep track of every single thing that they eat. There are only, like there was nothing she couldn't have any of, but there were a lot of things that she could only have a little bit of. And the constant grinding stress of worrying about every single bite that goes into somebody's mouth is exhausting. And that was one of the hardest parts about those early years up until she had a transplant, was just the constant vigilance about that. Like it can't be overstated how tiring and just like emotionally and mentally exhausting that is as a caregiver, or it was for me. That was one of the hardest parts for me.
Sure. And kind of to piggyback off of that, if you both wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that kind of goes with that dietary restrictions and things, the growth challenges that can happen as well.
Sure. Well, I mentioned we took her to Kennedy Krieger, so we got a second opinion over there and at Hopkins. And so we met with their nephrology team, and they were great. They were like, your team over at Children's is doing everything we would do. So it was great to compare notes. I would certainly recommend that, because this is such a small field. If you have the opportunity to get a second opinion, certainly it can only help. But one of the things that they mentioned to us was that their patients who are adolescents or teenagers or young adults mention as being like their biggest complaint about having kidney disease as a child is that it affects their growth. So lack of nutrition can affect growth, and also kidney disease affects growth because I think it's your pituitary gland is located on top of your kidney. And so if your kidney isn't functioning properly, then your body's not receiving those natural growth hormones that, makes you reach your like in your natural height. And so they recommended to us, again, this was around like 15 months, that we start growth hormone and that we start right away. And because of our situation with our daughter, and it was right. It was the right choice for our family. And we started her on growth hormone, and she took it up until she had her transplant. And I can say for her, the name brand worked better. I don't know that makes any difference, but we saw a lot, like we really saw better results with the name brand, if anybody ever discusses that with their doctor. And we also, like I can say that now she's like 4 years post-transplant. She has an identical twin, which is, you don't automatically get that like control subject in every situation, but I think she's like half a centimeter shorter than her sister today. So they're both on like the 85th or 90th percentile for height, which for a kidney kid is just unbelievable. Because it generally has a significant impact on their adult height. And I think Julie made a different choice for very valid reasons.
Well, we did try growth hormone for a brief bit when he was really little, but Colton has a lot more challenges as far as I don't know how do you say it. Special needs as far as his intellect. And so he is smaller for his age. and he's 13, but he's probably the size of about an 8 or 9-year-old. Although he has made huge growth progress post-transplant. Once you get a working kidney, it's amazing what kind of growth happens then. But the challenges that we have is that, even post-transplant, he would have qualified for growth hormone, and his nephrologist suggested it many times. And I finally had to tell her, we're just not interested, only because for us, behaviorally, Colton has some challenges where, there will come a time where he'll be too strong for me to handle. And we're actually almost there right now. And so it doesn't matter to me that he'll never drive a car, or he'll never, that's fine with me. And so I don't need him to be, 6 feet tall. So it's a personal choice, I guess. And so for us, it was not something that was high on our priority list for him to be quote unquote normal height. I think he's cute just the way he is.
Colton's awesome.
Absolutely. We're gonna, in just a few minutes, talk about navigating a kidney transplant. So if y'all wouldn't mind sharing a little bit, I think these kind of will flow together well, a little bit about navigating with your child being immune compromised, and then talk about the transition that each of you made into the decision for a kidney transplant, and then just some of that, hospital stay, recovery, and post-transplant. If you just share a little bit about that, that would be great.
Like Julie, we knew from birth that Katie would need a transplant. And nobody thought that she would make it through the first year without having to have that transplant. And so, at that point, I mean, frankly, they weren't sure she was going to live through that first year anyway. And so as soon as we could, we started getting transplant workups. And I guess it was based on blood type. Like, I guess I was just like immediately eliminated as an option, but my husband was a match, and we went through the transplant workup. So we had I showed up like paperwork in hand. I was like, we're ready to go, because all of this is so again, the trauma, the unknown, I've never been not an anxious person. And so to have this one thing prepared and ready, was comforting to me. It brought me a little bit of peace. And, so we also, in the meantime, Katie had developed, a lung condition. It's similar to cystic fibrosis. It's not caused by cystic fibrosis, but it's the same impact on the lungs that cystic fibrosis has. And so kidney disease causes, if you have kidney disease, you're automatically considered immunocompromised. So you can't fight off illnesses as easily as if you had, a fully functioning set of kidneys. And she had, they had done extraordinary interventions in the NICU. She was on the ventilator for weeks. She was on the oscillator at one point because she was so swollen that her lungs could not expand to take in oxygen. And so they had to shake it into her. And it caused, irreparable damage to her little tiny fresh lungs, because she was also a month early. And so, we learned that every time we took her out of the house, she would catch a respiratory infection and develop pneumonia. And, a lot of my ongoing chronic trauma is related to her having respiratory infections and pneumonia. And oh my God, is she going to die of pneumonia? And so, even before we got to the transplant of it all, we were already living with a significantly immunocompromised child. And that, that's its own set of challenges. And people will tell you oh, well, kids need to catch colds so that it builds their immune systems, and kids need to catch, they have to throw up and all these things. And that's great if you have a typical kid, but my kid can't touch the floor in the bathroom, in a public bathroom, because, we seriously might end up in the PICU. And that also extends to everybody else in our house, because we are her. We have to shield her with ourselves, because if I lick the floor at the bathroom and catch C. diff and then I come home, well, now I've given it to her. And so, that's one of the ways that our life looks significantly different than most people's, is we have to consider risks and precautions that most people don't even have to think about. And that was pre-transplant. And now post-transplant in a COVID world with a COVID transplant, that's been a whole nother thing.
Absolutely. Julie, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Sure. So Colton definitely has spent many weeks in the hospital. He literally got C. diff on the way out of the operating room from transplant somehow. They couldn't even believe it. They're like, how? I don't even know. And so we actually ended up staying. He was in the hospital after transplant for about a month. And then, after that, it's such a delicate balance of being able to live your life and enjoy life and protect him at the same time. So we kind of try and balance it, but it's kind of a family joke. Whenever there's something going on, we're going to travel. It's his birthday. It's a holiday. He will get sick, no doubt. In fact, we were trying to go out of town this weekend, and the night before I was like, he feels a little warm. Like, it's just our life, and we have canceled so many things, but we do keep trying, because I want him to have all those experiences in his life, and I want him to have a full life, and not live in a bubble. And so we kind of balance that, and we sometimes pay the price, but I feel like it's important for him to kind of live his life as best as he can as well.
Absolutely. One of the things that we were going to talk about next kind of also piggybacks right off of this is just coping with everything that comes with kidney disease and transplants. And some of the things I know in our prep meeting that both of you shared about were dealing with loss of control, lifelong medical needs, anticipatory grief, and then decision fatigue. So if you'd like to share a little bit more about that, I think that would be really helpful for our families.
If I could go first, Margie, because I don't know how long Colton's going to hold out.
Absolutely.
And you might have to mute me at some point.
No problem.
One of my things is the decision fatigue. When you live this life and it's constant, I feel like the burden is on me quite a bit to make major life decisions for Colton, like medical decisions, and I'm usually the one that's there in the emergency room or in the hospital. Not that my husband doesn't do his part, but it's just like sometimes he's got, usually it's like me. And so in my life outside of Colton, sometimes, my husband will want to take a trip or do something fun. And I'm like, you plan it and I'll show up. I can't, there's too many other things in my brain. There's too many other things that I have to consider and think about. And I don't have room to decide where we're going to dinner. Like, that's not something I can do. And so we have to really kind of work on that, because, he obviously doesn't want to have to make all the other decisions in our lives, but it's something that I really struggle with, because I don't want to seem like I'm not interested, because surely I love to do those kinds of things, but I just don't have the capacity sometimes. And what was the other few things you were talking about?
Anticipatory grief, and then just dealing with the loss of control.
Okay, so the anticipatory grief for me has actually gotten better over the last several months, but because he's been, knock on wood, somewhat healthy. But for us, Colton has been in and out of the hospital so many times that I just always anticipate something happening. And sometimes it does, a lot of times it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And so I definitely have to, and I also grieve a lot of things, like the child he was supposed to be. I grieve that. it gets better with time. He's 13. And so I kind of like, I switch back and forth. Sometimes I'll see a 13-year-old playing baseball or, doing something. And I'm like, wow, like we miss out on a lot. But Colton is the joy of so many people's lives. He meets people on the street and changes their lives. And so I have to remember that as well when I think, oh, well, he doesn't have friends. He doesn't have friends his age. He doesn't go on, outings or sleepovers or whatever. But it's a different life. And we're thankful for it, even though it's hard. And the loss of control is definitely a struggle. But you know what? I've kind of almost gotten to the point where it's like, you just got to roll with it, because what other choice do you have? Like, I would be an angry person if I felt out of control all the time. And so like when I had to miss my daughter's college graduation because Colton was sick. And I could have spent the whole day crying about it, but you know what? I watched it on Zoom, and we made it what it was. And so you just got to roll with it sometimes. And I always say, this is my saying, I always say, the sun will shine tomorrow, and it does. So that's how I deal with it. And I should be in therapy, and everybody who's listening to this should be in therapy. My only personal opinion.
Thank you, Julie, for sharing.
Yeah. So like Julie, I would say that the anticipatory grief is not as ever present now as it was when my girls were little, because again, we didn't know if Katie was going to make it. And so I remember sitting there seeing things like Caroline buttoning Katie's dress. Like I have this clear memory. She was buttoning Katie's dress. They were like 3 and they were playing, dress up or whatever. And I was just thinking, oh my God, like this should be them like getting ready for prom or getting ready, like want them to get married. And like, oh God, what if she doesn't? And, it's one of those things that as life unfolds, you know more what you can expect. We could still lose her, obviously, but her chances are a lot better than we thought that than I had feared that they would be, in the early days before we knew what was going on. Decision fatigue is right up there with, what I mentioned about like feeding earlier, where it never ends, because we have to constantly consider every single exposure, because, all of our situations are different, and the lung situation for us really throws a wrench in things. Like, she's not just got this, very serious chronic lung illness, but now she's immunosuppressed on top of that. And so we have concerns about exposure to soil, exposure to any aerosolized water or particles, and, constantly trying to do this risk benefit analysis in my head, because of course we want her to live a full life, not in a bubble. But we also have to make like responsible choices for her situation. Like we can't just expose her to, like reckless kind of risks, and trying to find that balance as just a person I'm not a doctor, I'm not an infectious disease specialist. And like the pressure and the responsibility of that is just, it's really overwhelming. And it's never going to end. And so that's one thing that I was thinking about when we were preparing for this today. I think it's probably a good segue into the next section, which is about finding support. So I'll put a pin in that for me. So make sure I come back to that. But the last one is like dealing with the loss of control, I don't handle that well personally. I like control. I like control before I had kids. I like for things to go the way that I expect them to go. I'm type A. And you know, it's terrifying because it's not just the stakes don't get any higher. You know, when you're talking about your child, you're talking about the life of your child. And it's like there's nothing bigger that you could lose. And it's really like scary, terrifying. None of those words adequately describe it.
Thank you both for sharing and, being so open and vulnerable. The last thing we're going to talk about, which we love to talk about at the end, is just different ways to cope. I know in our preparation for this, we talked a little bit about it. So in just a second, I'll have you share some of the things we talked about is, support system, mental health therapy. But I do want to highlight briefly before both of you share, there are a lot of resources in our Hope for HIE community. You have myself, the Hope for HIE social worker. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to support families, connect you with other resources. Just be there to listen and, to help support each and every family in our community through their journey, whatever that looks like and whatever, you're navigating with your child. We also have our child life specialist, Annie. She's phenomenal. She can do a lot of help with you with navigating these things with your child, how to prepare your child, how to work with the hospital, work with your medical teams to give your child the support, because this is also something that your child's navigating. And, it can be very much impact your child in many different ways. So we are here to support your family. Annie has the Child Life on Call app available, so please utilize that. We have support groups. You can connect with other families in our Hope for HIE community. And then if y'all would briefly share a little bit about nursing availability, utilizing camps or different events, also to make local connections, that would be great.
Sure. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is for resources. In my experience, it's really difficult for people, like people who don't live in our house, just, regular people, to sustain the level of like concern. I don't mean this to sound negative at all, but to maintain the level of intensity, I guess, like that it takes to live with or care for a person with chronic illness. People are really great with acute illness. They're great for like bringing meals when someone has surgery or, like if you've got cancer, like things that have kind of like a limited time span. But when it's just long-term, lifelong chronic illness, in my experience, it's really best to try and find more tailored resources than trying to depend on friends and family for the really intense support needs that you're going to have. And so I would say, I would recommend trying to tune into that, as early and as often as you can. Things like the HIE support groups, that's how Julie and I met. And I mean, Julie's been like a huge impact and influence in my life. A professional therapist, like everybody needs one. I agree. That's my advice for that too. And support groups of other people, made up of people who are living the same life, who also can't, like, you can't put it down, you have to carry it. And, I would say look for specialized supports like that.
Absolutely. That's really great advice. Julie, anything you want to add?
I think you're on mute.
We can hear you now.
Okay, good. I would say that I'm kind of an old timer since Colton is 13. We were around when Hope for HIE began, and so I am so thrilled with how far of a reach it has. I can't even believe it sometimes. I've met people in life just randomly who know of Hope for HIE, which is unbelievable. So it's really neat to see that, and because that's where I started. I started Googling in a NICU. I didn't even know what HIE was. I didn't even know what the words were, and so definitely, I'm so thrilled with how people are connecting that way. And I do, like Margie and I would text back and forth in the middle of the night sometimes, and that connection is paramount to success, because without that connection you're so alone, and being alone is no place to be. But I also encourage people to get together physically in person with people, to touch and feel and hug and cry and connect that way. We are a part of several local special needs moms groups, and that's been a huge help as well. For the Hope for HIE retreats I've been on were life-changing, so I'd highly suggest that as well.
And then before we close, if y'all want to share anything about kind of the other, like your support system, utilizing nursing, some of those other resources that may or may not be available, depending on where families live, but how that's impacted your journey as well.
We used night nurses when Katie was little, but we haven't used anything like that now that she's older. It's just it doesn't really fit into our needs. We do, she does have a waiver, and so we do, I think all the waivers all over the country are going through different, states of unwinding and unspooling right now, trying to, get out of COVID. So, unfortunately for us, those things have not been as, they were a lifesaver when she was a baby, but right now that's not really something that's, it's good and bad. Like I guess I'm kind of glad in some ways that we're not in that position at the moment, but if you need it, it's hands down, like go for it.
Yeah, I agree as well. We tried nursing when Colton was little, but he's such a conundrum. Like, he's hard to get, and so the nurses would not necessarily know how to handle him, and so we weren't able to do that. But I know a lot of people who do use nursing, and I think you definitely, if you're able to, that's a wonderful way to kind of at least take a breath for yourself sometimes. And definitely creating a support group, like, locally, that can, lend a hand sometimes is important. I know sometimes it's hard to let go of that control a little, but for me, I have to be able to walk away and kind of collect myself and come back to.
Definitely. This will conclude our recorded portion of this meeting, but what I wanted to say before we end the recording is just thank you, Julie, and thank you, Margie, for, taking the time out of your day and to meet with me today and just to share with the families that are watching this video now and the families that are going to watch this in the future, the professionals in the community. I just want to thank you both for being so open and transparent and sharing with your journey, because I know it is going to have a huge impact on others in our community of Hope for HIE and outside. So